If you look back on the 1970s, it only took 14 500-pound weaned calves to buy a brand new round baler. Today, it takes 41 of those same calves to pay for a new baler.
In the spirit of being profitable as ranchers, it may be time to ask yourself, should you be making hay? Dr. Carson Roberts with the University of Missouri walks us through 10 reasons that will make you take a hard look at haying. From soil health to oversupply, labor challenges, cheaper winter feed strategies, and of course, the cost of equipment. Those are just some of the topics of our conversation. And while we're thinking profitability, we're going to visit with Trevor Greenfield with Rio Nutrition about how we can maximize our profits through efficiency in feed and pasture so that we build resilience in our ranch business. That's all coming up on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Hi, everyone. This is the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. Glad to have you joining us here on our program here today. And as you heard there in the opening, we're really going to be dialing in on the concept, the mindset as ranchers to be profitable. Both our guests here today really focusing and emphasizing on that. We'll get to that in just a few moments. But I did want to mention how many of you have the latest issue. It is the September-October edition of the Working Ranch magazine. Always is full of a lot of great features, stories, articles. This one is no different, and it also includes the annual cattle care catalog. Take a look for yourself. If you have a subscription, you should have it. If you don't, you can go to workingranchmag.com and start, or you can also stop by your local Tractor Supply store and pick one right up off the shelf there. And a shout out today to the Tractor Supply store in Belen, New Mexico, in DeLand, Florida, in Emmett, Idaho, and in Fremont, Nebraska. Well, let's turn to our first guest here today. Joining us on the program is Dr. Carson Roberts. He is an extension state forage specialist out of the University of Missouri and also an assistant professor there. And Dr. Roberts, good to have you here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, no doubt our topic here today is going to perk some people's ears and minds up just a little bit when we start talking about 10 reasons why you should quit making hay. But I think before we start getting into some of those is really laying that out. I think in looking at this, I think the bottom line, though, is that we're really trying to get producers thinking about making sure that their operations are as profitable as they can be.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny in this point in time, we're at record high beef prices, but it seems to be that on-farm profitability is still okay. We're not bailing money and taking it to the bank right now, which is kind of an odd place to be at high prices, but also not record high profits. In a situation like this, we really need to look at what in the world is slowing us down, because we should be making a lot more money than we are. And so taking a really serious look at how your business is structured, what your enterprises are, and make adjustments based on that. It's really a business management issue more than, I would say, an agronomic issue. It's a hole where I see kind of a low-hanging fruit where you can make the most out of your profitability by changing your hay-making strategiing
Yeah. And I think before we start too, and one of the things that I think you'll always come back to as we look at this is really I think you have to look somewhat critical at what you've been doing, and you need to be open-minded about that. You may not change something, but I think if you're not looking at it from a critical standpoint with a fine pencil, then you might not find, as you had just used a little bit ago, the analogy of that low-hanging fruit in there. So we do need to be sort of hard on ourselves a little bit and not be so protective of what we have been doing.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's the trick. What we've done in the past may not work now. And so you always have to be at least humble enough to think about what changes you ought to make to stay profitable. We certainly don't do a lot of the things the way we did them in 1970. So we really got to look at all of those, all of the aspects of it and see what we need to improve on.
And I kind of preface that comment and that in your comments with thinking about the fact that as you are self-critical or self-reflecting on your enterprise makeup, we're not necessarily dogging that nobody should be making hay out there here today in our program, by no means. But at the same time, there's certain things that need to be considered in that process. So let's start down this list of 10 reasons you should quit making hay. And one of them just addresses, I think if you talk to anybody, it's funny that, or it's interesting that this is the number one thing on or that came up on the list here, because if I had mentioned to somebody else the other day that I was doing a show on this and that it would probably maybe raise the hackles on a few people or whatever as they try to defend this. But nevertheless, the topic or the first thing that came up with was exactly what you have as number one on your list, and that is the cost of equipment.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the article that I wrote, I compared our time now to the 1970s. If you think back to the 1970s, we also had record-breaking cattle prices, very similar to the times today. But if you look back on the 1970s, it only took 14 500-pound weaned calves to buy a brand new round baler. Today, it takes 41 of those same calves to pay for a new baler. And so even if you're using used equipment, you're still paying more as far as the calves go to support your equipment costs. And so if you're not spreading those costs over more animals, let's say that your ranch size has stayed the same over the past 50 years, your costs have gone up and you haven't expanded to keep up with those expenses. So that's what I wanted to get out with that one. It's just an issue of inflation. Equipment costs have outpaced beef prices almost 10 to 1 in the past 50 years. So you have to be mindful of that we're not farming in the 1970s anymore. We're farming in the new era where inflation is insane. So you just got to keep that in mind.
Yeah. And as you talk about that, what it tells me is that the economy of scale, you have to operate within that economy of scale. As you had talked about a bit ago, not necessarily today dogging on the haying industry because that is needed. I mean, there is hay that's needed in the countryside, so we're not dogging on that. But as you had pointed out there, the number of calves that we got to sell today to buy a piece of equipment versus 1970 is so vastly different that we have to understand our operations from an economy of scale of what makes sense. Just as if you're going to go feed cows, feeding 50 cows, you might feed 200 cows with the same equipment.
Yeah, exactly. And fortunately, we've had some advancements in technology, and that means that you can, the new round balers are far better than the old balers, and so you can actually do more with them. And I mean, if you do choose to use an old baler, it's still going to cost you more than it would have if you would have used a used baler in the 70s too. So that argument kind of falls apart as well because most people are not using brand new equipment. But the same concept holds true for used equipment. The inflation is still there.
Yeah. So that kind of leads us into the number 2 item on your list. We kind of jumped a little bit when we started talking about the conversation of economy of scale, because that's one of the things that you say really holds back some profitability in our ranch operations is that we've got too much equipment and that we need to be operating in the capacity that matches what we're running. And so expand on that a little bit more, because number 2 was we've got ranches that are over equipped.
Yeah. And this issue is a huge problem that's holding people back from profitability. So if we look at the size of farms, and I took Missouri for an example, the average beef farm in Missouri has 45 cows.
Okay.
And the average farm that makes hay in Missouri only makes 72 acres of hay. Okay. And that varies a little by where you are in the nation. Yeah. My home state of Idaho, the average hay farm makes 141 acres of hay a year. So it varies a little bit. But when you start adding up all of the equipment that you need to make hay, you need a tractor, and then you need a swather and a rake and a baler and maybe a tedder. And then you get into all of these other things. Well, if I need 1 tractor, then I need 2, and maybe I need 3, so that I don't have to unhook anything. And so all of a sudden, for that 72 acres, you just have so much equipment that the depreciation is killing you before you can even start to make up for the savings from letting someone else do your haying for you.
Mm-hmm. I know some numbers you talked about. There was... And this was a benchmark number. I keep in mind it could vary a little bit based upon the area that you're in. But that 400 cow outfit, if you're under that 400 cow outfit, is sort of a benchmark you were identifying. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So a 400 cow herd, and it just depends on where you are in the nation. They may feed around 240 to 300 acres worth of hay. If the average hay yield in this nation is 4 tons to the acre, which is about average, then you need about 250 to 300 acres of hay ground to make a 400 cow herd operate. That's if you're feeding hay for 4 to 5 months of the year. And so to make that pencil, that 200 acre mark, 250 acre mark is about where you're going to see the equipment be in stride with the amount of land that you have that you're making hay on.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That makes sense there. So, okay, let's take a break here, Carson. When we come back, I want to continue down this list. We've got 8 more items to get to. We're going to do that when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. This segment today brought to you by Allflex. It all starts with a tag, the most trusted portfolio of ID solutions.
It all starts with a tag. Identifying each animal allows you to better manage the entire herd and control your operation's future. For nearly 70 years, producers have chosen Allflex for individual animal management. With Allflex, you get the most trusted portfolio of ID solutions. Whether you need stock or custom visual tags, electronic tags, tissue sampling units for DNA collection, or syringes, bring the Allflex advantage to your operation today. Visit allflexusa.com to learn more.
We're talking here today about the 10 reasons you should quit making hay. And if you missed the first segment, I encourage you to go back and listen to that because we kind of set the preface on this a little bit. But we've been talking about skyrocketing equipment costs and then just ranches in general that are over-equipped for the amount of livestock that they're running. And maybe that doesn't work from a profitability standpoint in doing your own hay operation. Okay, let's move through this list. The next thing on the list was haying takes time. And of course, that's a given. We all know that. But I think the thing that has to come to the forefront there is what is the value of your time? And I think that's when you're addressing when you say haying takes time.
Yeah, haying takes a lot of time for most beef farmers. That is what they spend their summer doing, is making hay. And so if you start to think about what you're doing, you're sitting in a tractor, you're driving a tractor, and you could say that that's a $15 to $20 per hour job. And my argument is you as a business manager ought to be doing those things that are $30 to $100 an hour jobs. And so if you're making hay, that takes you away from the other things that you could be doing that could be making you more money. Mm-hmm. And this article was written mostly towards beef producers. And so if you're a beef producer and you're really good at producing beef, then maybe you ought to think about spending most of your time in producing beef and less of your time in producing hay.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I can't help but think of too is just even the time frame, the timing of the year of when we have to hay, which is given. That's going to be always the summer months, spring to summer months of the year, maybe into the fall with certain types of forage products that folks have planted on their operations. But a lot of times that can coincide with some things that we can do that could make us more money from a marketing standpoint or a production breeding standpoint or even infrastructure building time frame where we could be developing infrastructure rather than doing hay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're in the West, one of the low-hanging fruits as far as improving efficiency or infrastructure is adding watering spots so that you can graze more efficiently. That's something that you could do really effectively in the summer, but maybe you just don't have time because you're making hay. Another thing you could be doing is marketing instead of just, in the fall after a long season of making hay, you bring the stock trailer up to the chute and you load all the calves on it and you take them to the sale barn. Well, maybe you could have been spending some of that time making hay, talking with some buyers or talking with some feedlots and trying to market those animals so that you're commanding a little better price off of your product. It's funny, I do a field day in the middle of the summer, and one of the complaints is this is right during haymaking season, and if the weather's good, then I won't be able to come. And that's tough because your education, learning from other producers and learning how to improve your business is very important, and you can make a lot more money if you're out there learning about new things than if you're stuck on the farm making hay. you may not get those opportunities to network and to learn more about how to do things better.
Yep. Okay, let's move to the next item on the list. We're going to kind of jump down a different road here, but I didn't realize this until I saw it on your list here, and it makes an awful lot of sense. And that is that when we produce our own hay from year to year, we're always subject to the weather conditions at the time. And for a lot of folks, this particular summer in my part of the country may not be for everybody else, but at least in our part of the country, we were dealing with a lot of rain during haying season. And so there's a lot of hay that got rained on, but it had to get put up. And the guys that had maybe the ability to put it in bags and do those kinds of things may be able to utilize it and get some good use out of it. But other folks always don't have that. So I think the variable forage quality is something that we really don't think about. Whereas if we're purchasing hay, as we know, I bought a lot of hay over the internet, and I get a really nice report PDF file that tells me protein, TDN, all of the numbers that I need to know, and I can really dial in on the specific type of hay I want to purchase. But if you're producing your own hay, you are going to be subject to variability.
Yeah, you can 100% control the quality of the hay that you purchase. It may be costly or it may not, depending on the year, but you cannot always control the quality of the hay that you make. And that's even true in the dry states, like where I grew up in southeastern Idaho. Most of the time, we can make really good, high quality hay, and we don't have any of those issues with hay getting rained on. But there's those years, maybe the 2 out of 10 years where you do get a lot of hay that gets rained on. And, there's nothing worse than that sinking feeling in your gut when you see a hayfield being rained on for an entire week and knowing that when you put it up, you're not going to get much out of it. Now, as we move east in the country, that issue just becomes more exacerbated. You're going to have a higher chance of your hay getting rained on than you would in the western parts of the United States. And this year, we had some folks here in Missouri, some farmers here that cut their hay on the 4th of July or thereabouts. And a month later, they still hadn't picked that hay up because it rained essentially for the entire month of July. And so by the end of July, all of that work, cutting and maybe even raking the hay, and at that point, there's nothing there worth picking up with the baler. And so that can be a huge risk for you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move to the next thing, and that is, this is kind of addressing a little bit different topic here, but it's definitely something that we've heard more and more in the last several years about haying removes nutrients. Explain that a little bit further.
Yeah, and maybe that's something that you haven't really thought of, but there are quite a bit of nutrients in hay. In the fescue belt, a bale of fescue hay, we're looking at 32 pounds of nitrogen, 12 pounds of phosphorus, and 45 pounds of potassium. If you have alfalfa hay, that nitrogen number is going to be a little higher, maybe 42 pounds of nitrogen. And so when you put a price to those fertilizers in the hay, that's about $72 per ton. And so if you're able to buy hay for less than what the fertilizer value is, then you're getting a steal essentially. And the funny thing is, in parts of the country right now, you can buy a ton of hay for maybe $40 a ton. And that's probably not true in the West, but as you go further east, the fescue belt, that's definitely true. And so that's something to think about, because if you're not making hay, you can import nutrients in by purchasing someone else's hay. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword. You're getting the hay, and that's feeding your animals, but you're also getting the nutrients imported onto your farm.
Mm-hmm. I think this is a topic that when you say it, I get it and I understand it, but it's something that was just completely removed from my mindset of thinking about the value of what that hay is. So we're either removing it off the place with our own haying operation or potentially bringing it back in. And anybody that spends any money on fertilizer or adding phosphorus to your ground or any of those kind of nutrients that need to be added back in on your haying deal, they see that bill. That's not a cheap bill at the end of the summer. So that's interesting to hear that perspective. So it kind of leads to the next thing on your list. And that is, okay, so if I'm going to buy hay, what do we do with our hay fields that were here? how can we utilize those? And that would be, of course, some alternatives that we could be grazing and bringing in, if we don't have enough stock to fill it, bringing in cattle to fill it.
Right. And this is where I want you to think about doing what you do best. And for most beef producers, what you do best is growing beef. And we grow some really great high quality beef in America. And so think about what you can do in the springtime if you weren't making hay. And as of right now, you can make way more money custom grazing stockers, or adding value to home raised cattle by grazing those hay fields rather than haying them. You'll make more money. I've been doing some research. This is for a fertilizer project that I'm doing, but one of the comparisons is what the interactions with haying versus grazing and fertilizer. And what I've seen, big picture, what I've seen is that we're grazing stockers on these acres, and we're making about $200 more per acre grazing our stockers than we would if we were making a hay crop. And that's money, and that's cash flow. A stalker enterprise, even if you're doing a custom job for someone else, you're getting a check midsummer. Mm-hmm. So that's money that you can see readily. So there are some profitable alternatives out there to think about.
Yeah. Okay, let's take another break here. When we come back, we've got 4 more items on the list. We'll take a look at what those are when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. This segment today brought to you by the American Gelbvieh Association. Meet modern industry demands for feedlots and carcass traits with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics. Find out more at gelbvieh.org.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer influence females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. This year, make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics.
All right, Dr. Carson Roberts out of the University of Missouri is my guest here today. And earlier we were talking a little bit about haying takes time, so which means there's labor involved in that. Labor, boy, it doesn't matter what part of agriculture you're in or industry in our country. That is a topic that continues to rise up and be at the top of the list of why people can or cannot do something in any business. So labor shortages is also one of the elements of the things that we have to think about.
Yeah, and it's going to continually be an issue, and labor costs are just going to keep going up. I bought some hay from a fellow, a few weeks ago, and while we were putting the hay in my truck, he mentioned how difficult it had been this year to find someone to help him. And he mentioned it's hard to find good help nowadays, and kids don't seem to want to work like they used to. And my argument to him was, well, of course they don't, because they can go to McDonald's and make more money than if they were here on the farm, and they just don't have to do as much work. And I think that we should appreciate that a little bit, that a lot of these young people, they're interested in making money, and the really good ones, the ones that we want to work for us, they know their market value, and they know that they're worth a lot of money to someone. And so they expect to be compensated for that value. And so if we're not doing that for them, they're going to go elsewhere where they can make more money. And so that's kind of what we're fighting against. We're really not competing against other people in the ag industry as much as we're competing with other industries that could take our kids away from us, or could take our help away from us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the next item on the list that I want to go to, and I think some folks might have a little pushback when they hear this, because it could change from year to year for those of us that come out of a drought and those that haven't been in. But one of the things you have on the list is oversupply of hay. And of course, when there's an oversupply of hay, the price of hay goes down. It's not necessarily been the case the last couple of years, at least in our part of the country. Different parts has had that maybe, but oversupply of hay is one of the things you've got on the list.
Right. And yes, as you said, that is one that is specific to this year, which makes it a really good year to transition away from making hay to purchasing in hay, because it's a really great year to buy hay. And so you can sell your old hay equipment and go out and purchase hay for a bargain. And, that varies depending on the year. And when you start purchasing hay, it seems to be that the folks that start purchasing hay become really conscious of what the hay market is doing. And you'll end up purchasing hay during times of the year when hay prices are lower. So you can purchase hay in the middle of the summer. And during a year like this, when you may purchase more hay than what you need and carry it, and store it well and carry it over for the next year, because maybe next year we'll see higher hay prices. So when you start thinking about that way, then you can start seeking for those good deals, those good buys on hay, and buying it well and storing it well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, the next item on the list, it kind of goes back with one of the things we were talking a little bit about in the last segment, and that was in regard to hay removing nutrients. But the soil degradation, every time we turn some ground, there is some degradation that happens to that soil. Explain that.
Yeah. And so in the article, I mentioned carbon. And, it's funny. Most people, when they hear the word carbon, they think carbon emissions and global warming and all that nonsense. That's not what I'm talking about. When we hay, we remove not only all of the nutrients, but we also remove most of the carbon, at least all of the above ground carbon. And that carbon is an essential energy source for the soil life in our soil. And what does that soil life do? Helping our nutrients cycle. It's giving us aggregate stability. It's helping us infiltrate water. And so all of those bugs in our soil, they need an energy source, and carbon is their energy source. That's how they function. And so when we have soils that are not being fed carbon, so there's not being carbon trampled on the soil, or you're in a low carbon situation, you're going to see some soil degradation because those bugs don't have enough energy to do the work that they need to do.
Okay. All right. Our last item on the list, and it's a good way to maybe tie all this up together, because one of the things too is looking at, if you are going to quit making hay, how could you get maybe less reliant on hay? And so talk a little bit about cheap winter feeding strategies.
Yeah. So this is where we tie all this together. It's one thing to quit making hay, and that may save you money or it may not. But what will really save you a lot of money is when you start extending your grazing season. And you can do that in a number of ways. And there are some things that work better in some parts of the countries, like swath grazing would work really well in our northern and western areas where we get a lot of snow. In the fescue belt, of course, stockpiled fescue, that's just a no-brainer. So really, the numbers on a stockpiled fescue, you can stockpile fall-grown fescue for about half the cost of making hay. And so, that's half of your feed price. If you can cut your feed price in half, you're doing really well. And there are some other options as well. Like something that we've kind of developed here in Missouri is the milo grazing. And right now it costs, with the hay prices where they are, it costs about $1.17 to feed a cow for one day. And then if we use stockpiled fescue, you can get that down to around 62 cents, maybe 50 cents, just depending on the year. And milo grazing, if you graze stockpiled milo, you can get that down to about 45 cents a day for feeding hay. So there are some really cheap winter forage options, and there's a lot of them. And so it's really a mindset that you have to get into, that feeding hay, making hay is expensive. And so what do you do instead? Somehow you need to figure out a way to keep your animals on pasture for longer. And that's going to look different in your operation from any other. And so you need to just be a little creative on what you do. And one thing I'll mention here is that I guarantee there's someone in your area of the country that is feeding very little hay. I don't know if I know very many farmers that are feeding zero hay, but there's quite a few producers that feed maybe a month or less. And they're all over the country. Growing up in Idaho, I can name two people right off the top of my head that fed very little hay. They basically graze stockpile in the wintertime. And here in Missouri, I can name, dozens of producers. So one of my recommendations is go find somebody that is doing it, that's out there doing it. And there's somebody in your region. Go find them and figure out what they're doing, figure out how they're doing it, because I guarantee that they're making money on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. There are people doing it all over. Dr. Roberts, as we kind of wrap up our conversation here today, some good things to think about. And I really think I think at the ultimate, and you'd said this in the heading of your article, was just really, it's about profitability. We're not trying to make somebody feel bad or point out exactly that you're doing everything wrong, other than just the fact of sharpening your pencil, looking at the bottom line in this, and figure out ways that we as a ranching business can be more profitable.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. I'm really all about farm profitability. And so any way that we can improve our profitability, then, more power to you. So yeah, this is an opportunity for you. Take a look at all of your expenses. And when I say all of your expenses, I mean all of them. What are your land costs? Are you paying yourself rent on your land? What are your equipment costs? Are you accounting for the depreciation of your owned equipment? What are your labor costs? Are you actually paying yourself for the labor that you're doing? It's funny, there's a line item on the Missouri beef budgets, and down at the bottom, the bottom line is the net returns. And for the 2024 beef budget, that was a negative number. But there was one underneath it called return to land and labor, and that was a positive number, about $150 a cow. So when you think about that, where are you being fairly compensated? And then remember that your net profit is what you make on top of what you're paid and on top of what your land is paid. That is a number in surplus of that. So remember what your net profit is. I always encourage people, become friendly with your neighbors. We're stronger together, and we can make more money together.
All right. Well, Carson, good to have you on our program here today. Great conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You bet. And again, our guest today is Dr. Carson Roberts. He is out of the University of Missouri Extension Office as their state forage specialist and also an assistant professor. And a conversation here today that I believe lends itself for each of us to be self-reflective in our own individual and respective operations when it comes to looking at what we're doing and what we could be doing, because really at the end of the day, there is an aspect of this where we do need to be profitable in what we're doing for the long benefit of our ranching operations. We're going to continue this discussion of profitability, but heading down another vein in our next segment, so stick around. This segment today brought to you by the Mansaver Post Driver by Roar Manufacturing, the portable, lightweight, and easy-to-use pneumatic post driver where the name speaks for itself. When it comes to building fence, driving those steel posts can be exhausting and absolutely backbreaking. But there is another way you could be doing this. Now, I'm not talking about those bulky and expensive gas-powered or hydraulic pounders. What I'm talking about is the Mansaver Post Driver. Yeah, it's called the Mansaver Post Driver by Roar Manufacturing. This is a portable, lightweight, easy-to-use post driver that runs off of any small air compressor and is 100% made in the USA. The Mansaver Post Driver comes in a variety of models, from driving posts ranging from vineyard stakes to T-posts and all the way up to 3.5-inch diameter posts. While it may be called the Mansaver Post Driver, shoot, I've heard some go as far as calling it the Marriage Saver Post Driver. But take a look for yourself. See it in action when you go to their website at roarmfg.com. That's ROHRERMFG.com. Or if you want to talk to a real person, give them a call at 800-980-7599. The Mansaver Post Driver, the portable, lightweight, and easy-to-use pneumatic post driver where the name speaks for itself. And joining us now here on the Working Ranch Radio Show is Trevor Greenfield, who is founder and co-owner of Rio Nutrition. A lot of folks would recognize the name of Rio Max or possibly Rhizo Green. And Trevor, good to have you here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Justin, thank you, sir, and thank you to the listeners.
One of the things that you talked about with me as we were talking was just the fact that really one of the things that you feel is important in not only in your company, but in the industry as a whole, is that for ranchers, we got to be driven to be profitable. And that's one of the things that really for you and your company is really, how do you do that? And I think that's been something that you have been trying to emphasize in what you guys do.
Yeah, Justin, really, as a family business, Rio Nutrition is purpose-driven. And everything we do is really led by the compass, you might say, of our purpose. And that is driving profitability back to rural North America. And the spark that's inside of me and in our company is to help reinvigorate and put the life back into rural North America. And it does come down to profitability. Money is not everything. However, our economies do need that financial viability to have that longevity to survive.
Yeah. There's been a lot of times on our program here that I have emphasized the fact that we as ranchers have to view our ranches as a business in order to be sustainable. If we like the aspect of passing it down to the next generation, we got to be sustainable, which means we need to be profitable in what we do. And a lot of things, as we look at this, I look at it as a business and as a ranch as a whole. There is a lot of our costs in the course of a year of running a cow, whether you're running cow calves or whether you're running yearlings, but there's a lot of that cost that's tied up in some aspect of feed, whether it's manual feed that you're putting out in the bunk or putting out on the ground, or whether it's cattle running on pasture. And when you look at it, that to me is the biggest, maybe it's the lowest hanging fruit in ways that we can try to be more efficient.
Efficient, that's the word. And we have an old wore out saying here at Rio, and that is get more out of what you've already got. And so that might be getting more out of your hay or your feed, as you've alluded to, Justin, with technology like the Rio Max technology that helps ranchers get more out of their feed and forages to the tune of 15 to 30%, or get more out of your land. And that's with the riser green, where we see a 10 to 30% increase in tonnage. Now, this is not about trying to peddle products here today, but rather to educate folks that there are tangible ways that we can not only conserve our dollars, but reinvest them so that we're building a healthy, functioning ranching business or ranching system that will outlast these good times. We have good times. Mm-hmm. The calf checks this fall are going to be solid, and they should be, and ranchers deserve it. But looking to the future, my message is, how can we use these good times, conserve the dollars we get, and plow them back in, you might say, so that we have a more resilient ranching or farming system for the medium to long term? Mm-hmm. That's what I want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things I look back about maybe 5 to 6, 7 years ago, and profitability was not there for ranchers. And if we could make $50 a head, we felt like we were doing a lot. Now, I think the caution I hear you saying, or I feel a little bit, is like $50 back then was a big deal. That was our profit. Now if we're not careful, we can throw away $50 just because we have it. And really, what could we do if we had $50 a head extra this year to plow back into our business?
Yeah, exactly. And so back to that, getting more out of what we've already got, there may be tools that you can use to optimize the genetic potential of your herd, or to optimize the production capacity of your land. And there's only so many levers we can pull that are in our hands in the ranching business. Obviously, we're subject to weather and markets and a lot of fluctuations, but there's a few levers. One is conception rates.
Yeah.
One is weaning weights. And probably the biggest one is feed costs.
Yeah.
So we can control those levers. We can also control the fourth one, would be the production capacity of our land. People ask me, what do you do? Well, we feed microbes. Sounds kind of weird. That's not kind of weird, because it actually makes a big impact. And so I call it the hay program. It's we help save hay and we help make hay. But I'm just giving examples to kind of foster this creative thought and creativity within the ranching industry. Is what can you do with your dollars this fall to help lay up for the future?
Yeah. So I want to get a little bit more detail in this. And there's two things I want to hit. You know, we're heading into the time of the year where this grass is starting to wane a little bit, and the protein requirements are not quite there in the grass that you'd want if you're trying to put a bloom on these calves. So I want to hit that aspect. But then I want to talk about something else. And that is as you were talking a little bit of feeding the soil side of this. But let's talk first about just getting the most out of the hay. I'm not really seeing the big dip in the hay prices that I thought I would see just yet. So if I'm going to spend that money on that value on the little hay that I'm going to need, I want to make sure I'm getting the most out of it. Or the grasses, I've got a lot of grass this year, and I want to stretch that as long as I can.
Well, it all comes back to efficiency. I was told years ago, efficiency never goes out of style.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about that. You know, first of all, pasture ground, then talk about protein briefly, and then feeding the soil as a third. The pasture ground, as you said, it's September now, and we're starting to see that grass start to cure out. And from now through the fall, the lignin in the grass becomes higher. The higher the lignin, the lower the digestibility. And so as stewards, I've never met a rancher that didn't want to leave the land in better shape than he found it or that he got it. And so as stewards of the land, I think it's smart and it's wise to conserve our resources, stretch our resources, optimize our resources. And so with the science within the RioMax tubs, we're doing that to 15 to 30% in savings, or you might say stretching. Now, when it comes to feeding hay through the wintertime, the same science applies. We're feeding the microbes in the rumen. They're doing a better job of extracting nutrients, protein, energy, calcium, phosphorus, zinc, manganese, selenium, everything. We're extracting more out of everything. And so what that looks like is with RioMax, we do protein differently. We're not direct feeding protein like many other companies do, and there's nothing wrong with direct feeding protein. We're doing indirect supplementation technology, IST. And what that is, as I said, is it's feeding the rumen microbes. There's more of them. They reproduce. And while they're alive, they're squeezing more out of every mouthful. But when they die off, which they do between hours and days, depending on the species, they become microbial protein. Microbial protein is a game changer because now that cow has a protein production mechanism installed within her. And that's not according to RioMax, that's Mother Nature. The buffalo that roamed the plains in the thousands, they didn't need protein supplementation because they used what we call microbial protein. And so we're not reinventing the wheel, but we are absolutely driven to work with Mother Nature, not against her. And in doing that, we're able to run way more efficient and reduce the dependence on hay. I still think we need to make our decisions through a frugal, money sense lens. And then just the third point, they're feeding the soil. When you feed the microbes in the soil, your native microbes, they serve to unlock nutrients that are tied up, and that makes those nutrients available to the root of the grass or the alfalfa or the plant, and it looks like 10 to 30% more tonnage. Mm-hmm. And so it's a very simple thing. It's working with Mother Nature. It's feeding the natural system, and what it looks like is a clear economic impact.
Yeah. And I think really at the end of all of this, I think there's a lot of guys that are not necessarily opposed to the concept of some input costs. But as you had alluded to earlier, it's all about the ROI. And we got to make sure that we're getting that return on it.
Absolutely. And so we've lived through some real tough times and drought and depressed calf prices. And I say it every day, but, you know, RioMax is not just for ranchers in good times when they've got money to spend. Absolutely not. RioMax is for the frugal rancher that is looking for ways to run more lean and mean, possibly making your cows work for you versus you working for your cows. That is the RioMax customer. Now, in a good time, it just means we were able to ride that wave a little more.
Yeah. Well, Trevor, we've talked a little bit about the company real quick. If folks are interested in finding out a little bit more, I know you got some dealers, a dealer network across the country as well, but they're also the website that they can go to for not only the RioMax that we probably heard a little bit more, but if you're interested about feeding the soil and that element of it, the Rhizogreen, what's the websites for more information on those?
Certainly. So if you go to riomax.net, that is our main website. You can learn all about RioMax, the tub that pays for itself. At the top of that home page, there will be a little green tab that you can hit for Riogen, and that'll take you to the Rhizogreen website. Both websites are loaded to the gills with ranchers and farmers and growers just like you guys that have used it. They've been skeptical. They've used it. They've seen the results. So take a listen. Don't listen to me. Listen to them.
That's a good way to put it, but a good conversation here today. And I think it hits home too, Trevor, with just the fact of really we need to be thinking beyond just, we're going to make some profit this year, but how do we even do more with that? Because there is the ability to put some money back into our business, to put some money into infrastructure that can help us when this market isn't at record high prices.
Absolutely. And salute to men and women in ranching, in agriculture. Thank you for all you do and your hard work. And, you know, there's an old saying, Justin, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And as a family business, I would like to say to the ranching community, guys, we care. And that's why we're on air today to share some ideas of how to conserve the dollars that might flow from good times and invest them so that you have a stronger, more resilient tomorrow.
You bet. All right. Well, Trevor, good to have you here today on the program, and look forward to visiting with you more maybe down the road as well.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. All the best for all the men and women in ag.
You bet. And again, that was Trevor Greenfield, founder and co-owner of Rio Nutrition. And again, the website that he had mentioned a bit ago was riomax.net. And now let's turn to the Captain Tim O'Byrne for this.
Hey everybody, Tim here. We're fixing to come up on 1 million downloads of our Working Ranch radio show podcast, which is really exciting. And it got me to thinking about another viral moment that we had back in 2017 when we ran a short Facebook video of the Safety Zone calf catchers. And it was so popular, it got 6.8 million views in the first 5 days. I want you folks to check it out, Safety Zone calf catchers. It's a great product for all producers. Keep you safe when you're working with baby calves, especially for old timers like me who maybe can't outrun those cows anymore. Check them out, Safety Zone Calf Catchers.
Calving season is a favorite time of year, but along with that special time are dangers, extra stress, and increased labor. Safety Zone Calf Catchers are all about safety and making processing new calves easier. Designed for ATVs or UTVs, one person can do the job and never be threatened by the protective mother cow. Make this and every calving season safer and easier with a Safety Zone Calf Catcher. Watch videos and customer testimonials or order yours today at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914. Affordable and made in the USA. Make your upcoming and all future calving seasons safer, easier, and stress-free. Durable and designed to work anywhere you can drive your ATV or UTV. Order online at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914 today.
Today's Long Range Weather brought to you by Long Range Cattle Dewormer. And you know, this time of the year, a lot of us are going to be working cows, and it's a good time to get with your parasite protection program. And with Long Range Cattle Dewormer, did you know you have 150 days of parasite protection? If you want to help your cows not have to compete with those parasites in their body for fall and winter feed, now is a good time to get updated with your parasite control with Long Range Cattle Dewormer. Find out more at longrangedewormer.com. Well, as we turn now and take a look at our long-range weather, joining us is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, as we get into here the month of September, of course, we've already been talking about quite a bit in previous shows, abnormally cooler weather across many portions of the country. But in addition to that, when we look at a drought monitor map, it's kind of been that spine of the country that goes from the Canadian border down in through New Mexico and Arizona. It has just been a dry part of the country and in the Four Corners. But it sounds like they could be potentially seeing some moisture here in the upcoming future.
Yeah, there's a couple of things going on. You know, first of all, the past week or so, there was finally some measurable rain in a lot of areas that had struggled to get really anything for most of the summer. And we have a unique situation where we have the remains of Hurricane Lorena that is coming up out of the Baja of Mexico in the northwest Mexico. And that's going to feed some higher humidity air into Arizona, New Mexico, even parts of the deserts of California. And that's going to work north into Utah, Nevada, parts of the Pacific Northwest, western Colorado, far western areas of Wyoming. And that's going to lead to some shower and thunderstorm activity. Then next week, towards the middle to the end of next week, we're going to see a system settle into the Pacific Northwest, and it's going to kind of set up shop over the Central Great Basin for several days. Now, this is not a terribly wet system, but the cooler temperatures, the clouds, and at least the opportunity for occasional showers for a good part of the week to 10 days ahead will happen west of the divide, which is something that's been a struggle all year. So while the nation's midsection still has a cool end of summer, we're going to see a little bit of moisture in the far west.
Okay. You talked a little bit about this was the remnants of a hurricane. Where are we looking at that? Because I know there's some movement and some activity going on in those particular areas. How is that going to affect as we look out 10 to 14 days out?
Well, one thing we do need to watch is there is likely going to be another Atlantic hurricane forming. Now, the Atlantic has been remarkably quiet Aaron was a very large, very powerful hurricane that pretty much missed about everybody, thankfully. You'd think the odds are eventually going to catch up with us as we're now hitting the peak of the hurricane season. And we do expect another hurricane in the Atlantic to form in that time period you just mentioned. And I do think that the pattern may evolve that could affect the southeast United States. Now, this would be out a little bit towards the middle of the month, but we do see the activity in the Atlantic basin picking up. And as we just mentioned, we've got some hurricane activity. We've got a couple of hurricanes here in the recent weeks in the Eastern Pacific. It's just that they haven't been affecting anybody. And that's really how the hurricane season has gone so far. It's been pretty quiet. There's plenty of time for it to ramp up. But so far, we've been fortunate.
Okay. Let's hit a little bit in the middle of the country. Let's say east of the Continental Divide to west of the Mississippi and in that area of the country. What is that going to look like in the next 10 to 14 days?
Well, we're not going to see it as cool as it's been. The last week of August and the first full week of September, temperatures in parts of the upper Midwest and Northern Plains were a good 10 to 15 degrees below average, not just for a day or two, but for multiple days. One thing that has happened with that cooler air, and this is typical when you start to see Canadian cold fronts, you don't have a lot of moisture to work with these frontal systems coming out of Canada. So it's been a cooler, drier trend. As we go into mid-September, I think that'll change a bit. While I certainly don't see any real September heat wave coming in, I do see the middle part of the country getting warmer. That's going to probably be associated with at least a little bit of a better chance for some shower or thunderstorm activity. But we're kind of getting at the tail end of the widespread rain season as we transition from late summer to early fall.
Yeah. Well, I would guess, too, that, especially in the Corn Belt area, there is some desire to probably see those temperatures stay a little higher up as that corn cures out.
Yeah, definitely. And with the size of the crop and all the estimates of it being a big one, certainly you don't want to see something come here at the tail end to put a dent in that. Doesn't look like that's going to happen, even though it's been much cooler than average. We haven't had anything that's been threatening a frost or a freeze. It's just been cool.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing about the cool temps across some of this area is it has put a damper on it. Maybe not as much moisture as they need, but it sure has slowed the fire season down a little bit.
Yeah, it has. We're still dealing with wildfires in Canada, parts of the West and the Pacific Northwest. And it's critical that we get through the next 4 to 6 weeks here because, as we know, well into October, if we don't have a good, wet period of stormy early fall weather, those fires can go deep into fall.
Yeah, very good. All right, Don, appreciate the update. We look forward to talking to you next week.
See you then.
You bet. And again, that is meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-range weather. Today brought to you by Long Range Cattle Dewormer. Find out more at longrangedewormer.com. If you'd also like to follow along with meteorologist Don Day in his daily video podcast, you can go to his website at dayweather.com.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the weatherstationexperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Well, the Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. If you'd like to get a hold of me, maybe you have some comments, questions, concerns, or ideas for show topics, you can send me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.